Hello and welcome. Today we are in the Tier 9 Japanese aircraft carrier, the Taihō. Yes, you heard that right. Tier 9 aircraft carrier. Because that's what we had back in the RTS days. We are on the map Islands of Ice before the global warming nation attacked. Look at that. Look at all of those islands, especially the bottom right. It's really cool. I really wish we had a map kind of like this in the game right now. I don't know how fun it would actually be to play, but it's different. Like if you really want to have something spicy happen, you can go through that ice field and fight. One of the things is you don't really have to worry about long-range torpedoes there that much, right? At the same time, you do have to worry about things like ambush torpedoes. Not to mention that that's actually a pretty good place to protect yourself against aircraft carriers, or at least RTS CVs, because RTS CVs do most of their damage with torpedo bomber drops, which means that you actually need room to the side of the ships to do that torpedo bomber drop, and those islands are pretty perfectly positioned to prevent you from properly doing those. Dive bombers, they're okay. Also, compared to the previous match, the Midway match that I showed you was from 2018. That was 3 years after the game had already released. It was a relatively refined thing already. People knew what was going on. This match, however, is either back from the beta, it's from 2015, or right after the release of the game. Something you might want to pay attention to is how players play, because this is an actual example of what players played like at the start of the game. So if you say things like, oh, players are getting worse and worse and worse, well, you'll see some weird things here. Anyway, fighters didn't have strafe back then, so there is no fighter versus fighter action. Also, their CV is tier 7. Now, I do make a really weird choice here. I'm looking for a way to get around to actually strike something. As you can see, the enemies are actually grouping up early on. This is something that people did often because the cruisers would usually have defensive fire, and this would make it basically impossible to attack. I mean, you can still do an attack with torpedo bombers. The drop just gets really wide and you eat maybe 1, 2, 3 or torpedoes. Usually 1 per squadron. I mean, look at this. Look at how far that Atago is. They're actually pushing early on, and also paying the price for it. So I'm looking around to find the target, and I'm not really finding it. Actually, I don't know if I'm doing that. Maybe I am, trying to find the enemy CV, because that is something that happened quite a lot back then. CVs would try to strike each other right at the start of the match. This map was actually kind of a problem on this front, because if you look at it, the top right corner has a lot less room than the bottom right corner, which meant that it was a little harder quite often to try to stay safe from it. Yeah, the CV is actually turning away, because back then you could actually control the CV better. I genuinely believe that when they improved the autopilot, it actually made it worse for CVs. So there are cruisers coming in, which means defensive fire. I'm probably not going to be able to do a proper drop. Honestly, I really shouldn't have done this drop. But, at this point it's kind of too late to decide. Oh my god, I'm only going to hit a single torpedo. Wow, that was a waste of time. It did start the flood though, so if I can hit him with my dive bombers afterwards, they can set the CV on fire, which means that the CV can't launch planes anymore, because this is something you do have to do. Like, plane management. Controlling on which planes launches when is really important. And blocking the enemy from launching can be quite useful. So there's a fighter here that can lock on to prevent a proper attack, but I'm hoping that I can manual drop the Hiryu here to start a fire, because if I can do all 3 drops, it's pretty likely to result in some fires. Oh yeah, double fire even. Back then, damage control party and CVs was not automatic, and even if you did use it, or even if you were set on fire, the CV would actually burn, unlike these days. Also, if somebody remembers, do you remember if this was the initial version of Islands of Ice, or was there a different Islands of Ice still that had even more islands positioned in a bit of a different way? Because I have a memory that there was a little bit different, and I mean even before this one. Maybe from the beta or something. Anyway, I don't think we're gonna be able to do anything to the enemy CV. I'll just use my fighter to harass them and just strike battleships. At least that's what I assume is gonna happen. That should be an Iowa, right? Also, we didn't have a full battle interface on at the time. Like, there was no option for it, I'm pretty sure.
Group 3, we're under attack. Group 3.
Oh, that looks like a nice drop.
Returning to ship.
23k, 12k, and another 8k. Sadly, also, we didn't have damage numbers on the screen at the time. Eventually, we got a mod for it, but even that took a while. At this point in the game, it just wasn't there. Also, I would like to point out that I'm a tier 9 CV and there are tier 9 battleships, but there are also tier 6 ships in this match, because matchmaking was +/-3. Well, not plus-minus, but like a range of 3. So there are Fusos in this match, for example. So here I do a trick. So this Atago has a fighter plane, right? And I deliberately flew the dive bomber in there first, so that the fighter would lock onto the dive bomber, so that I could do a drop without getting interrupted. So when a fighter locks on, it's basically the same as attacking into defensive fire. Okay, we only landed a single torpedo. That's not really worth it, I think. Oh, and as you can tell, there's standard battle where the cap is only in the middle. It's actually not that great of a game mode, because players would just play the way they normally do, right? Even back then, people just didn't care about winning this much. They would just not care. Also, that destroyer is completely spotted the entire time, and the battleship is having trouble. Oh no, we are actually behind 3 ships even. Surely we'll be able to win this, right? One thing to note, or another thing to note, is that planes are pretty slow. Oh, Hiryu, you're pretty low HP. Maybe we can go and finish the CV off now, because this would definitely help my team. But we need to stop the bleeding. We're losing a lot of ships, although with only 2 planes left, maybe this won't even do much. But we'll see, we'll see. Me back then was a little more knowledgeable about these kinds of things. Oh, I guess another dive bomber coming could actually finish it. Because now Hiryu had to use damage control party to set off the fire. So if I can set another fire, I think that should actually finish the Hiryu off. The CVs actually take extra damage from fire back then. Okay, so I'm guessing one of the Fusas is gonna be the target, probably this one. So if you want to farm the maximum amount of damage, or wanted to, what you would want to do is you would want to use your planes one at a time, or at least as few squadrons at a time as possible. Now this does mean that you lose more planes, but the thing is you would basically try to flood out enemies and burn out, right? So you would flood them or set them on fire or something like that, and then do it again so that they take maximum amounts of damage over time. That way, and you kind of have to do this because the strikes, while they might have very, very high alpha, you do have to remember that they take a long time to actually do, because the planes aren't quite as fast as they used to be. Or they are nowadays, sorry. Okay, I'm sure the torpedo bomber and the dive bomber are enough to finish this Hiryu. 6000 HP? Surely. Surely. So one of the difficulties of playing a CV back then... Oh, completely missed with the dive bombers. One of the difficulties at the time was actually doing a proper drop. You see, the interface wasn't as fluid as it is these days. You could do about about 2 clicks per second, I believe, something along those lines. If you clicked more often, it just wouldn't register the clicks. On top of that, the planes actually did have to turn, and they had a turning circle. So if you did the drop a little bit wrong, as in too late, too early, the planes might end up doing a circle in place, which meant that they took more damage, and the drop would actually be in the wrong position. Okay, I'm being shot at. Not great. Especially if I think about it from a modern perspective of World of Warships, a CV showing broadside can just end the CV immediately. Back then though, well, people weren't quite as good at aiming, and people did fire HE quite a lot. You couldn't really tell though, because HE and AP shells looked the same. I believe at least. They did change it, but I don't remember when. Probably not this early on though. But the CV is gone, so we are in control of the skies, and wow, we actually have high caliber already. That's something. But I mean, the team seems to need it. We have 6 ships, they still actually have 7. And the cap is slowly still being taken. We need to decap in some way. Oh, hello, Fletcher. See, I'm not doing an anvil drop or anything on this Fletcher. And we're still gonna land a torpedo on him. Or 2. And people say that players haven't improved in this game. Can you believe that? Man, that Iowa is such a... It is such a nice target here. She's turning perfectly for this drop. Well, actually maybe not. She has to turn a little bit further out. Oh no, I think she's trying to oh, defensive fire, I think, or the fighter. But it was too late. The first drop was actually proper. But the enemies are still halfway through the cap. If the cap finishes, I believe they just win the game. So we absolutely must stop them from capping. This is pretty close. I don't know if it's even up to me. I think it's up to all of my teammates at this point. By the way, back then you could do things as a destroyer like permanently smoke, at least American destroyers. You could go somewhere, you smoke up, and by the time your smoke would dissipate, you would have a smoke screen again. Which was kind of funny. Probably not as funny if you were playing against it, but when you were doing it, it was pretty great. Okay, so I think we have passed through the crisis. The enemies aren't quite as close to winning by capping the base. Gonna finish off this Iowa, I believe. Well, if the torpedo or if the dive bombers actually hit.
Group 7 taking fire. Group 7 returning to ship. Group 8.
Yep, double fire, excellent. She should burn down from that. This torpedo bomber just chilling randomly in the anti-air of this cruiser. Luckily though, Atago had pretty terrible anti-air, so it didn't really matter. Like the ships they have here, other than the Pensacola, are kind of whatever. They don't have anti-air that matters that much. Remember what I said about the planes doing the circles and you had to get the timing correct when doing a drop like this? Pay attention to squadron number 3, that torpedo bomber in the top left corner. Look at that timing. Okay. I'm gonna do a drop on this Atago, but I mistime it a little bit. And now the the torpedo bomber goes and does a circle and almost did the drop, but it would have completely missed. You had to land the drop immediately, otherwise it was too late. And you have to get the angle correct. If you're trying to make a turn that's too much, it won't work. Also, thank you for following, Irvin. I wonder if he still watches my videos sometimes. Regardless, goodbye Atago. Next up is one of the ships still in the cap zone. Man, you know, if they just had a destroyer camping the cap zone with a smoke screen, they would have already won the game, I think. It's not like we can do much. I don't even know if radar was in the game at this point. So one of the other things you could do, you could actually take your planes and click on a ship. And the game would basically try to do a rough drop. It's never gonna be perfect. The dive bomber drop circle, for example, is larger. And the torpedo bombers, I think, are extremely easy to avoid if you do that. But you could do that, and against enemies that didn't actually react properly, it was effective. Like, in some ways, playing these CVs was a little easier. At least the skill floor was a little lower than modern CVs. Especially with like rocket planes, you have to get the timing pretty tight. With these, you could just click. Anyway, it's pretty clear that they're not gonna win this match anymore. They tried, they really did try, but it never worked out for them. But look at how close everyone is in this fight. Right? Look, the CV was close enough to basically be shot at by everyone. The battleships, the cruisers, everyone is relatively close range. And I think the game was more fun like this. Because, well, long-range engagements just aren't as exciting, I feel.
Group 3, we are under attack.
Okay, Pepsi. By the way, Pensacola was a tier 7 cruiser back then, with one of the worst concealments in the game. Well, worst out of all cruiser concealments, I believe, and actually worse than many battleships. I actually enjoyed RTS CVs back when they were like this. I think going down the path of the strafing fighters was a mistake, because that caused the problem where CVs would just end up deleting each other's planes, and whichever CV player was better would just end up dominating the game even harder. I think this way, where you're just striking surface ships or even other CVs, was the better choice, because, well, you could just balance anti-air versus plane HP and plane reserves, etc., and how the attack runs work better, right? You could find some kind of compromise on the numbers where it just worked out a little bit better. Whereas, and it won't cause the problem where one CV just ends up dominating so hard of the game. Also, another thing is, CV spotting was a problem back then, too. Also, the other thing is, if you liked RTS CVs, after they changed it, you don't actually have an alternative for it. There is no other game that plays like RTS CVs did. Even if you think you could go and play an RTS game, it just won't be the same. Also, old settings menu. So the thing is that RTS games won't offer the same one ship control with the way the planes work. RTS units tend to not have this kind of micro requirements where you have to actually get the angles and attacks properly correct to make things work out. So sadly, if you like this, there is no other thing you can do. There is no replacement. But it is what it is. I got to play it back then and I enjoyed it. Man, look at this Alba. She's like 5 kilometers from the battleship. Just show broadside casually, launch your torpedoes, and then the battleship just dodges the torpedoes and finish off the battleship with HE. And people played a bit differently back then. So, what do you think? How good of a game was this? I mean, it's a high caliber, 29 torpedo hits, arsonist, Confederate devastating strike. Did you expect 3,516 base XP though? Did you? Well, you might not have, but look at that. The hit on the enemy team also got 1,700. This is the damage I did. It adds up to about 240,000 damage. 161,000 of which was directly from torpedo hits. Honestly, they really could have just nerfed the torpedo hit damage, and that would have gone a long way to make the CVs not feel as oppressive. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I would like to thank the patrons on Patreon. Thank you very much for your continued support, and I hope I'll see you guys next time.